Good day, duelists! Welcome to the next installment of Top 10 Cards of Each Civilization. In this video, we are covering Fire. And let me tell you, this was one of the harder lists to make. As a reminder, this top 10 rates cards in terms of competitive viability, so how many competitive decks does this card see play in, and how important is it to set decks, but also how well does the card represent the Fire civilization, and how much does this card make me want to add Fire to my deck. Let me start with some cards that did not make the list. First of all, a card that some inexperienced players might expect to find in here, it's Dragon Bajula. Bajula is a strong card, don't get me wrong, but 7 mana evolution creatures are difficult to bring in competitive environments, especially when they have to evolve on top of dragons. I do think Dragon Bajula has some potential, but so far at least it has not found its competitive home. Then we have Sapient Tark, arguably the creature which allows Wave Strikers to function as an archetype. While its Wave Striker bonus is active, the opponent is basically locked out of playing creatures because Sapient Tark would just kill them. While that's incredibly strong, Wave Strikers as a deck has never quite been top tier, so unfortunately Sapient Tark will have to sit this one out. On to some honorable mention, and there will be quite some of them. First of all, we have Kukpalon and Snipstriker Bullraiser. Both very strong 2-drop creatures. Kukpalon shines in the aggro mirror, while Snipstriker Bullraiser is better against controls, as its 3000 power makes it immune to at least some fire removal options. While both of these see play in Firewater Rush, which is a strong deck, that is pretty much the only meta deck they've managed to find their home in, as aggressive decks will oftentimes dedicate their fire slots to either speed attackers or blocker removal instead. They're also both overshadowed by Gonta in decks that combine fire with nature. Next up, Fire Civilization is well known for its mass removal, but not all mass removal is created equal. And some spells like Searing Wave, Blizzard of Spears, or Mecha Dragon's Breath just barely didn't make this list. These are strong cards, don't get me wrong, and they do see competitive play, it's just that the top 10 cut has to happen somewhere, and these just had to be left out. There are many other cards that were close to making the list, such as Volcanic Arrows, Comet Missile, Magma Dragon Jagazor, Twin Cannon Skyterror, and while I could sit here all day and talk about these cards and more, I think it's about time we move along and actually get into the top 10 list. Starting of course with number 10, Magma Rex. A shield trigger creature that, when summoned, destroys all creatures with power 1000. Now you might think that's a pretty narrow range of creatures, and you'd be right, but it turns out that sometimes it's just enough. Imagine your opponent summons a Deadly Fighter Braid Claw on turn 1, then follows that up with a turn 2 Mushroom or Pig or Kukpalon or Emerald, and just breaks your first shield. If that first shield is a Magma Rex, congratulations, you've just won the duel off the back of this one card. And yes, that's like a Disneyland ideal scenario, but it sometimes happens. And even when it doesn't, keep in mind that Magma Rex has 3000 power himself, so even if it only kills 1 or even 0 creatures with its effect, most likely it will still be able to trade into a 2000 or even 3000 power creature. The fact that it's a shield trigger makes it splashable in a wide variety of decks. We've seen it played occasionally in Forbos Control and in Rubin Deckout. We've even seen Fortress Burn splash it in sometimes, even though it doesn't run fire, because if you get it from your shields it doesn't matter, and you can always soul swap it in from your mana zone. Now, you might notice that I said it's only occasionally splashed in these decks. It's not a mainstay in any of them, which is why it's only at number 10, but I do have a hunch that we'll be seeing this card more and more as time goes on. Next up, number 9, Q-tronic Gargantua. This is an interesting one. It's a survivor that breaks additional shield for each other survivor, so it will obviously only see play in one type of deck, survivors. So if it only sees such limited play, why does it make the top 10 cut? Well, this creature alone not only pretty much defines the entire playstyle of fire-based survivor decks, which is build a big board then finish the game in one turn with Gargantua, but it's also the reason why we would choose to add fire to survivors in the first place. And while fireless survivor decks do exist, focusing on more of a mid-range game plan, they tend to be outperformed by the fire versions, which Gargantua enables. As such, even though this card only sees play in one type of deck, and that deck is a bit niche, because of how much of a centerpiece it is and because of how much it enables the Fire civilization within the survivor archetype, I think Q-tronic Gargantua is well deserving of the number 9 spot. Number 8, Bolmeteus Steel Dragon. the finisher of choice for fire-based control decks, Bolmeteus allows taking shields without giving up card advantage, and as we all know, control decks are all about that card advantage. Dropping one of these after starving your opponent of resources puts them in a tight clock to top deck some piece of removal, else the duel will just be over in a couple of turns with no chance for comeback. It sees play in many rogue decks, but also in mainstream ones such as 4-bus control and in some versions of Ruby deckout. That said, the reason why it's not higher up on the list is because, well, oftentimes the decks that play it can win without it. Deckout arguably doesn't need it at all, in fact, I don't run it in my lists, and it's only kept there in some versions as a backup to the main game plan. But even in decks that do need it, I feel like it's oftentimes there as a formality to end a game you've already won. Not always, of course, sometimes Bolmeteus just wins games on its own, but often enough. You are so far ahead you could probably win by just swinging with your creatures. Bolmeteus just allows you to do that safer. Which is still good, don't get me wrong, but it's by no means a centerpiece of any mainstream deck, nor a reason that pushes you to play fire, hence I cannot in good faith place it any higher on this list. Number 7. Rikabu the Dismantler. The definition of a simple speed attacker. Rikabu comes in, takes a shield, and then probably dies, but you know what? It did its job. For 3 mana, a free shield break plus absorbing either some piece of removal or an opposing creature's attack is really not all that bad. Not to mention, sometimes there will be no immediate answer for it, in which case it will move on to taking on 2 or even more shields, in which case you've probably just won. As the cheapest speed attacker out there, it's no surprise that Rikabu sees play in pretty much every rush deck, most notably Fire Nature Rush and Fire Water Rush, and cheap speed attackers are indeed one of the main reasons why you would want fire in those decks in the first place. As soon as your deck starts being even a little bit slower though, like Fire Water Nature aggro for example, a creature that breaks one shield and then dies starts to become less appealing. Which is why Rikabu the Dismantler only fits in the very fastest of decks. Fortunately though, those decks are very strong, so that's enough to place this little guy at number 7. Number 6. Bazagazeal Dragon, the second big fire dragon on this list and probably my favorite Duel Masters card of all time. Bazagazeal Dragon comes down, kills something, then returns to hand. It's like a reusable terror pit, though obviously with some more restrictions. Being able to swing for 2 shields as well is the cherry on top, sometimes being that little extra something that's needed to end a duel. Having a Baza in hand basically locks your opponent out of summoning single creatures. They need to play at least 2 creatures at once if they want to stick one. In top decking scenarios, this essentially means that your opponent needs to skip every other turn, which is oftentimes game winning by itself. Of course, blockers can get in its way, especially things like Gigaslag or Taj Mahal, which can trade with it 1 for 1, but Bazagazeal Dragon is still a powerhouse of a card. The only thing that keeps it from being higher on the list is that it's usually run at only 1 copy or 2 in very specific decks, and there's just 5 other cards that I had to place higher. Number 5. Volcano Charger. If there's 2 things control decks love to do, it's destroying things and getting to high mana values. And Volcano Charger helps with both. It helps stabilize against early game pressure, while simultaneously giving you quicker access to your power plays. It's no wonder it's a staple in pretty much every fire control deck. 4 mana is a good place to be because it means the turn following a Volcano Charger, you can play a 6 mana card which can be a board reset like Blizzard of Spears, Burst Shot or Mechan Dragon's Breath. Power-based removal is also one of the main mechanics of the Fire Civilization, and it turns out 2000 or less is a very good place for a spell to be. 4000 and above is already big boy territory, which is out of scope for such cheap removal, but the interesting part is that there's not that many meta creatures at 3000 power. There's some of course, like Belix or Bullraiser, but for the most part it turns out 2000 or less is the exact sweet spot to deal with most relevant non-boss creatures. All of that said, Volcano Charger is pretty much run in exactly the same decks where you would see a Bazagazeal Dragon, just usually at more copies, so it feels fitting to put it exactly 1 position above it. Number 4. Deadly Fighter Braid Claw. Arguably the quintessential Duel Masters 1-cost creature, Deadly Fighter Braid Claw is probably the card you want to see most often in your starting hand when playing fast decks. 1-cost creatures are just incredibly powerful in Duel Masters, and unlike some others, this one you just slap on the board and start swinging with very little downside. The reason why 1-drops are important in Duel Masters is, let's say you're going first, you slap the Scissored Man down, your opponent charges mana and very likely doesn't have a 1-drop themselves. so Braid Claw just goes in and takes 1 shield for free. It's your opponent's turn again, they charge to 2, and if they just so happen not to have a 2-drop as well, which would often be the case for slower decks, Braid Claw takes another 1. By this point your opponent is already desperate, they charge to 3, hopefully they have a 3-drop, but before the 3-drop can even attack, Braid Claw takes a final 3rd shield before being traded off, at which point this innocent looking 1-cost creature has already broken more than half of your opponent's shields, and it's not unlikely that you just win the duel off the back of that. It's of course included in any rush deck such as Fire Nature and Fire Water Rush, and is arguably one of the main reasons why Fire is included in these decks in the first place, since having a turn 1 play is just so important there. It's arguably the face of rush decks in Duel Masters as a whole, and as such is well deserving of the number 4 spot. Number 3. Apocalypse Vise. One of the things Fire is most well known for, especially in control decks, is mass removal, and Apocalypse Vise is the ultimate mass removal spell. If your opponent's board is full of small creatures, in general they will all die to just 1 cast of Apocalypse Vise. 4 creatures of 2000 power, 8 creatures of 1000 or anywhere in between, Apoc spares nobody. But where this card distinguishes itself from other mass removal spells is in its versatility. What if there is a medium-sized creature in between a couple small ones? Well, Apoc can take care of that. What if there's just one big mean Bolmeteus dragon staring menacingly at your shields? Well, Apoc can take care of that. The flexibility of this card means it's almost never dead in your hand, and the same cannot be said for pretty much any other fire removal spell, which is why Apocalypse Vise stands tall above the rest. Needless to say, it sees play in pretty much every single fire-based control deck, like Phobos Control or Ruby deck out, and it is, together with other mass removal spells, the main reason why Fire is included in these lists. Any Duel Masters player trying to build a board is scared when they see their Fire opponent tapping 7 mana, so Apocalypse Vise is no doubt top 3 material for this list. There's just a couple cards that I had to put above it. Number 2. Burst Shot. So I just said that Apocalypse Vise is the ultimate fire removal spell, and now I put a different mass removal spell right above it? What's up with that? Well, no doubt Apoc will in general have more impact when it is cast, but Burst Shot has one line of text that makes all the difference. Shield Trigger. Hardcasting this for 6 mana does oftentimes get the job done, since like we discussed before with Volcano Charger, a lot of creatures have 2000 or less power, but the real strength of this spell lies of course in its shield trigger ability. To say that having this in shield save games is an understatement. There are duels where having Burst Shot in shields is the only way you're winning. Imagine your opponent plays a creature on turn 1, then follows it up with 2 more creatures on turn 2, and well, it's turn 2, Deadly Fighter will break 1 shield, next turn these all 3 will attack, and it's turn 2 and next turn you're already looking to go down to 1 shield. There's no way you're withstanding this early barrage. But then you flip your first shield, and it's a Burst Shot, and at that point, your opponent can probably just concede. The impact that Burst Shot has on the meta cannot be understated. Aggressive decks must always have Burst Shot in mind. I should attack with my small creatures first so that if it's a Burst Shot, at least they got their attacks in, or I should summon at least 1 big creature so that I don't get completely wiped by 1 trigger, or even during deck building, I should try to include some bigger creatures as well, just so that I don't insta-lose to Burst Shot. It's obviously played in pretty much all decks that run the previously mentioned Apocalypse Vise, as they serve a similar purpose. But generally Burst Shot is played at more copies since you need to increase your odds of seeing it in shields. That coupled with just how much this card forces duelists to play around it, maybe more than any other card in Duel Masters, means that it just had to be placed this high up. And finally, what could be better than Burst Shot? Well, at number 1 we have Pyro Fighter Magnus, and I feel like I really need to explain why I put this card at number 1, but hear me out. First of all, let's get the obvious out of the way. It's a 3 mana speed attacker, just like Rikabu from before, but unlike Rikabu it doesn't get traded out by anything after it attacks. In fact, it doesn't get traded out at all, because it returns to hand at the end of the turn, which at face value is a downside, but oftentimes it acts as protection. It can be traded into, it doesn't die to mass removal. The only way to deal with this is through this card. And if your opponent is spending mana on this card, it gives your creatures in the battle zone more room to breathe. So it's no surprise that Pyrofighter Magnus sees play in rush decks that we've mentioned before, Fire Nature and Fire Water, but also sees play in slower aggressive decks such as Fire Water Nature Aggro, from where the previously mentioned Rikabu the Dismantler was missing. But that alone would not be enough to put this card at number 1. So here's the thing, Fire Civilization has this duality. On the one hand you have aggression, good 1-drop speed attackers and the likes. On the other hand, you have mass removal, control tools, big finishers, and these two sides of the Fire Civilization are polar opposites. They don't mix with each other. Cards on this list so far have been in either one bucket or the other. Pyrofighter Magnus, however, yes, it's primarily an aggro tool, but it's sometimes splashed in control decks as well because, well, in a sense, it's like a repeatable Crimson Hammer. It comes in, it can kill a small creature on board and then return to hand to do it again next turn. And that's really not bad. It also has the flexibility of sometimes giving you that little extra reach that you just barely need to close out a duel. It also has great synergy with Miraculous Meltdown, a card that can break all your opponent's shields at once, which means a cheap speed attacker is enough to deliver the final blow, which is the basis for a row combo deck. All in all, Pyrofighter Magnus is arguably the best cheap speed attacker, which makes it an invaluable aggro tool, but it also breaks the duality of the Fire Civilization, finding a niche fit in some control decks as well, and because of that, I am putting Pyrofighter Magnus at number 1. So that's it, that's the list. Once again, we have Pyrofighter Magnus, Burst Shot, Apocalypse Vise, Deadly Fighter Braid Claw, Volcano Charger, Bazagazeal Dragon, Rikabu the Dismantler, Bolmeteus Steel Dragon, Q-tronic Gargantua, and Magma Rex. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Are there any cards that I missed, any that you would have wanted to see? Do you agree or disagree with my picks? I can't wait to hear everyone's opinions. For now, that's everything, duelists. See you next time, and as always, take care.